Welcome back to Secret Weapons. My name is Mark Johnston. If this is your first time here, this is a YouTube channel where we do gear demos and reviews, as well as studio tips and tricks for leveling up your writing, your playing, and production from the perspective of a guitar player working out of a studio. If that's the kind of thing that would appeal to you, please hit that subscribe button and stick around for future videos. Today we are taking a look at the EchoFix EF-P5, the FET compressor. If you're somebody who's familiar with studio compressors at all, you'll be able to see from quite a distance this is, in fact, very much an 1176 style compressor. Of every iteration of the 76 I have used on a pedal board, of which there are many, this is, to my mind and to my ear, the most accurate version of a 76 for a pedal board. For those of you unfamiliar with the 1176 compressor, it is a solid-state FET compressor known for its incredibly fast response time, grabby, aggressive dynamics, and its ability to be used as more than just a compressor, but also as a color and saturation shaping tool. And this FET compressor from EchoFix here is an aggressively accurate recreation of that circuit. You have your input and output gains with a fixed compression threshold built into it. You have your separate attack and release controls that are slower to faster as you turn them up. You have your compression ratios on 4, 8, 16, and 20:1 compressible buttons. And much like with the real unit, you can press in multiple different switches at the same time, including the kind of famous all buttons in British mode. On the right side of this VU meter, you can turn it off. You can have it set up to show gain reduction as applied by compression, or you can have it set up so it shows the output level of your signal at either 0 or +4 decibels. But a couple of really cool things here that are not in your average 1176 style recreation, whether that is a hardware unit or in pedal format. You have a mix control that will take you from the kind of classic fully wet that you would expect to get from a rack 76, or be able to parallel blend in your dry tone. And then down below that, you have a high pass filter. And that high pass filter is not there to high pass your actual audible signal, but instead applies a high pass to the version of your signal that triggers compression in the device. And the reason that that is valuable is because, especially with instruments like guitar on the neck pickup, or extended range instruments or bass guitars, or even with drum buses, low frequencies tend to have a lot more energy and will trigger compression more aggressively than higher frequencies will. And so by high passing the signal hitting the compressor threshold, it reduces the amount of energy hitting in those low registers, allowing for a more even responsive compression from low notes all the way up through higher notes and more sibilant moments. This is something that we will touch on more in depth on our guitar and especially in the bass sound samples in this video. Along the top of the device right here, you have your input, which is a combo jack for either 1/4 inch input or a microphone input. You have a gain switch right here, which is labeled as normal or boost, but to my ear and in my use case with this thing, I would almost prefer to see it labeled as boost being standard and normal being more of a padded input almost. If you're running this thing on guitar or bass or anything other than particularly loud sources, the boost setting is going to be the thing that you're going to want to kind of start with, because it's going to allow you to use the kind of classic 1176 startup position of input between 6 and 7 and output between like 1 and 3, and have it feel pretty close to where you want to be already. Like I said, in loud contexts, jumping over to that normal mode will serve you really well. But if you are a conventional instrumentalist who watches this channel, you're probably going to want to live in that boost mode up top. You have two separate outputs on this device. You have an unbalanced output, which is going to be for 1/4 inch TS cables. And it's going to be used for things like using it as an insert or using it on your pedal board. Or you have a balanced XLR out for sending it to a microphone preamp or for use in an effects loop in your DAW. And two other really nice additions in the EchoFix's take on the 76 compressor is the inclusion of an external side chain, which will basically allow you to trigger compression not by the signal passing through the device, but instead by an external sound source. And we will demonstrate that in this video with our Von Gone synthesizer, where we will use that with a drum machine externally triggering the compression to give you that kind of classic EDM style side chaining. And finally, like I said earlier, the 76 is kind of renowned for its fast, snappy, aggressive compression. But EchoFix has also included a little switch up here that goes between normal compression times and a slow mode, which is going to take your attack and releases and bring them even more gentle. It will really take you into a place where like the release on this thing goes to being a couple of seconds long, it feels like. And this can basically allow you to take something like a 76 style compressor and create a much more gentle form of compression, more akin to something like tube compression. One final note on the layout here is you'll notice you have two different switches on the face here. And this right one is going to be your bypass for the pedal writ large. And on the left side here, this is going to turn on and off the compressor itself. And that is because you can use this thing as a tone shaping tool as well. You basically have an input and an output transformer built into this thing. And those input and output controls on here will allow you to determine how hard you are driving your signal into the transformers in this device. And so you can effectively use this as a boost, as a saturator, as a color tool, devoid of any compression in the device by disengaging your compressor, activating the pedal, and then when you want that compression, you can then stomp that on as well. Those input and output controls are going to be active regardless of whether or not the compressor switch is on and off. And you can insert the compression ratio that you want by activating that as well. So let's get into some sound samples with this thing. We're going to start with the most kind of conventional and obvious use case. We're going to put this into the front of an amplifier. We're going to use a Strat. We're going to play into a Morgan PR12, which is a Princeton style amplifier, and just hear the EchoFix compressor in its kind of very conventional as a guitar compressor context. Let's give it a listen. So as always, before we get into our sound samples, let's talk through our signal chain and context we are working in. I am playing my Fender Eric Johnson signature Strat with DiMarzio virtual vintage pickups into the EchoFix FET compressor. We are running into our Morgan PR12, which is a Princeton style amplifier, mic'd up with an AEA N22 ribbon mic. We're recording into a Maris 440 preamp with an 80 Hertz low cut. This is what our dry tone sounds like. So we're going to run through everything in the EchoFix, but before we get into the compressor side of things, let's go ahead and pop out all of the ratio controls and call attention to the fact that you have both a bypass switch and a compressor on-off switch. And as we touched on earlier, this thing has this really interesting boost switch up top that, in my opinion, can almost be thought more of as a headroom control, with boost being more standard and the unboost being more of a more clean headroom, almost like an internal input pad. But either way, we are going to go ahead and keep the boost engaged because it's kind of what you need to have things set to for your guitar to kind of react to this the way you expect an 1176 style compressor to react. But we're going to go ahead and disengage the compressor on two different levels. One, we have all of our ratio switches popped out at the moment. And number two, we're going to go ahead and disengage the compressor side when we turn the FET compressor on. The reason for that is I want to go ahead and take a look at the way in which this thing can boost and color your sound even without including the actual compression system itself. You, of course, have input and output transformers built into this thing, and they will kind of add a little bit of color and saturation and give you the ability to kind of press into your amp a little bit more. And you can actually use this as a way of hitting your amp harder and kind of waking up those tubes before even engaging your compressor. Let's give it a listen. go ahead and kick in that 4:1 ratio switch. As you can hear, we're getting that very classic compressor squish, even with our time controls at noon. Let's go ahead and spin up a slightly more aggressive version of that kind of 70s quick attack sound. We're going to set fast attack and release times. We're going to increase our input gain and decrease our output gain to kind of compensate down a little bit. And then we're going to get a really kind of like fast, grabby compressor sound. So obviously we are in a kind of number 3 or number 2 or number 4 position on a Strat, which is going to have that quackier tone anyways. But we are also getting a lot of grab and smoothness out of the compressor. Let's compare. Let's go ahead and slow down the attack just a hair, but really slow down that release and kind of dial up what I really like to use in terms of like sloppy two-hand tapping. And we'll showcase why a good compressor is so essential for bad tapping. So as you can see now, when we cross our threshold, you will watch that VU meter take a lot longer to get back to 0. Versus and that slow return means that everything is still going to be compressed and have compression applied to it, even if those notes aren't past the threshold, because compression is still being applied. So something like sloppy, bad tapping like this. Smooths things out, and obviously this is an exaggerated example to showcase the effectiveness of this. In reality, what you would want to do is probably bring down that mix a little bit and adjust that high pass filter so that you're not so aggressively grabbing all those low notes as well. Really, really effective for just creating that sense of consistency, brings those soft notes out to the forefront, but, beware, because it also brings all of your mistakes to the forefront as well. Let's go ahead and go back to full wet, take that sidechain back out for now, and take that filter back out for now. And let's give a little bit more of a listen to the attack and release times, and then flip that slow switch up top. As you can hear, when you go to those slower settings on the attack, you get a lot more of your transient back. You can hear that pick attack a lot more pronounced. Slow for both can be really effective for keeping a lot of breath back in the attack, but will also smooth out playing dynamics across the board. Can be helpful to roll back that mix in this context to keep a more natural feeling in your playing. This kind of setting is really useful for trying to avoid the sound of compression while still giving yourself just a little bit more body and sustain in your guitar. What you can also do is bring the attack speed back up, keeping that release really slow, and go with this parallel setting right here to even out the differences between strumming chords and picking through those chords. Once again, without giving too much of a sense that you are compressing your signal. Let's go ahead and jump over to that slow mode and use that to kind of play with a little bit of finger picking. As you can see, the recovery time is going to be really slow at its kind of most extreme in slow mode. That is a very slow return. Let's go ahead and crank the reverb on the amp right now to give ourselves access to a really dreamy sound. Taking the compressor out. go ahead and jump back over to the regular mode, go back to a nice kind of like medium set of compression controls, take that sidechain back out and walk through the different compression ratios and the ability to mix and match them by pressing in the various configurations. And of course, if you want even more aggressive and extreme compression sounds, you can do some of the kind of classic console tricks like pressing in 2 different compression ratio buttons at the same time, including the classic all buttons in British mode. So right now we have all buttons out. Let's go ahead and push in 4 to 1 and 20 to 1 at the same time. As you can hear, we're getting way more severe of a compression algorithm right now. Great for getting like crazy sustain. Eight and 12. And let's go ahead and take a look at the classic all buttons in mode. This is going to be kind of like peak amounts of compression. This is the mode that we use on that intro song for a lot of the kind of like slow moving chords. And just to get crazy with it, let's go ahead and slam this as hard as it'll go. That is the sound of smashing into the transformers in this thing with that input gain. Next up, let's dig a little bit deeper. We're going to use the FET compressor on bass. For these sound samples, we are going to run my bass into an Origin bass rig amp in a box, and that has an XLR output on the back forwarding to your preamps. And rather than running the EchoFix comp into the front of the amplifier, we're going to take that mic output on the amp, run it into the mic input on the EchoFix, and then run that to our preamps to get into our DAW. And this is basically going to allow us to use the EchoFix as more of a studio compressor, a post effect instead of a conventional pedal compressor. So for this section of the video, we're using my Jennings short scale bass into the Origin FX bass rig Super Vintage. We're running out of the DI out into the XLR input on the FET compressor, using the balanced output to go to a Lauren Audio Panther preamp. Let's give a listen without the compressor first. So as you can hear, with the compression circuit turned off, you get a pretty significant boost from those input and output transformers. But with that compression turned on, as we are currently in fully wet mix with no high pass filter engaged, you can hear that when we really hit those low notes, you'll feel that pretty heavy sag and volume reduction of our bass. So before we start playing with our input and our output or those attack and release controls, let's start by just giving a listen to how that high pass filter and that mix can kind of sweeten things up a little bit. So as you can see, there's something of a sweet spot in the kind of first half of that high pass filter range that will give us access to consistent compression on both the lower register and the higher register of a bass. Part of it in this context, especially with access to something like a mix control and those attack and release controls, I find that that high pass filter is less about super consistent compression explicitly because we have access to those parallel mix abilities, and more so consistent energy. Electric basses tend to thin out pretty quickly without compression or some sort of like evening applied to them. As you can hear, we go from pretty kind of beefy low end to a somewhat anemic high end. And that right there, even without that volume boost, will give us a lot more of an even response across the whole thing. Let's go ahead and take a look at those attack and release controls. I'm going to look for something here because we're going to then use that mix control at the very end. I'm going to look for something that adds a lot of control and a lot of sustain. So if you want something super punchy, you can go fast and fast where you really grab the transient of the pick attack, but also let go to avoid kind of like overtones ringing out too much. But let's go ahead and play with those attack and release controls. As you can hear, once you get to that really fast setting right there, you can really feel the squash happening on the pick. But somewhere right around here, you have just enough transient while still getting a lot of that kind of initial control and the energy that comes with it. And we're getting a very kind of like punchy, quick sound with those fast release settings. But if you slow that release down, you'll get a lot more sustain out of your notes. The trade-off there is if you are going for that really fast, punchy thing, and you leave that release really long, you're going to find that you haven't reopened the compressor threshold enough when you hit that next note. Great for consistency in legato playing and for chords that ring out, but a little bit tricky when it comes to punchy, aggressive, kind of angular bass playing. But here's the beauty. You can kind of split the difference on both of those. I like to split the difference on the release a little bit more, but lean into a faster attack. Let's go ahead and start squashing this thing, including using a higher ratio. And as you can hear, we are getting a lot of squish out of this, which gives us a lot of sustain, but is also actually getting into a little place of that kind of awkward blooming effect. So let's go ahead and parallel mix in our dry. And last up, let's go ahead and grab our Von Gone Replay synthesizer and not only hear how running something like this synth into a compressor can add smoothness and some character to the synth itself, but we're also going to use the poly-N step to trigger that external side chain to show how that could be used not just for kind of conventional bass ducking, but also creative and rhythmic ducking effects in the EchoFix. Let's give it a listen. So let's go ahead and take a look at the side chain control on the FET compressor. So we'll start off by actually just showcasing how the EchoFix sounds with synth in general, because I think it does a great job of smoothing things out, especially if you do something kind of aggressive like a 4 and 20:1 ratio combination. But what we're going to do is play some synth bass. And then we are going to activate the compressor, give it a listen, and then we're going to take the poly-N step and insert it as a side chain on the top of the device to give us some kind of like, that classic synthy side chain thing. So let's give it a listen. So obviously there's some added tonality and kind of character and smoothness that comes with slamming a compressor like this with a synthesizer. Let's go ahead and get the poly-N involved. Thank you so much for watching. If you made it to the end of this video, please like the video. Please share it with somebody. It helps the channel grow. And this is a device that I'm excited to kind of keep in my arsenal here, keep it close at hand. I use my Rack 1176s on almost every project, and having one more way of incorporating 1176 style compression into my rig here is something that I am going to be very excited to implement moving forward. So let me know what you would like to see use cases for something like this in the future. Do you want to hear things like the EchoFix on acoustic instruments? Do you want to hear it in conjunction with something like the JHS Color Box as a grab and go studio rig on a pedal board? Let me know in those comments down below, and I will see you in the next one.